we are all as separated, industrial or food production, environment, health, which can no longer be regarded and analyzed in complete separation now. Understanding and addressing the COVID crisis pointed at our relations to animals and the environment, at our dependence on non-national production for masks, drugs, vaccine, at our tight interdependence under globalization, like the variant you have today is the variant I will have tomorrow. For Bruno Latour, the virus gave a lesson of meticulous, point-by-point political action, working its way individual after individual and reorganizing economic and political orders. We saw it very clearly in France. It was illustrated by the President Macron, whatever the cost, political slogan during the crisis. We saw it also in the EU, where it resulted in challenging the 3% doctrine about budgetary discipline in the end. The lesson here is in taking for us here seriously the model of action. That is the ceaseless repetition in action along a chain, ending up destabilizing and reopening political orders that until then seemed so hard to open. This lesson suggests considering energy change and energy transitions as chains of actions that are multidimensional and do not have only energy as a consequence, but also social and environmental dimensions. It suggests that we cannot develop new energies deemed renewable at the cost of social or environmental justice or of the environment, without acknowledging and debating these other dimensions. We can no longer hold these dimensions as separated. So my talk will build on a collective work about energy transitions that has been published in a book at Palgrave 3 years ago, and that was a 5-year program about energy transitions in France, Germany, and also Tunisia. I was, however, told here not to speak only to social scientists, but to other scientists. So I decided to turn it into a sort of hero's tale about energy change and renewable energy. And in this tale, I will tell first what we know about the political dimension of energy change as social scientist, and how and why it is commonly made invisible, so black boxed. Second, what we know, what it means to follow as a sociologist, the chains and threads of transformation involved in producing renewable energy, with 2 examples related to wind power development in France. And third, and in so doing, I will really stay close to technical operation and social transformation in order to lay bare the politics thereof. Third and last, I will conclude with 2 points. First, the importance of following threads if we take transitions seriously, meaning as a genuine change in our way of relating to our environment. Second, what social acceptance as an approach to conflicts around renewable energy project misses. So changing energy has many dimensions. It can underlay change in political organization and order. Timothy Mitchell, historian, has analyzed the transition from coal to oil during the 19th century. He has studied the relation between the emergence of Western democracies and the politics of energy production, in particular, the role of strikes in the energy sector. He has shed light on the co-construction between energy order, what resources do we live from, and political order. To put it and simplify it, to put it in a nutshell here, he has argued that the materiality of oil, liquid as opposed to solid coal, allowed transporting it over long distances and thus delocating energy production and its politics far away. The very materiality of oil has thus for him been a precondition to the reconfiguration of bargaining power between states and workers in the extractive energy sector. This analysis shows that political orders are woven around the extraction and exploitation of energy, that changes in energy are also changes in political orders. Moral and political ideals have also been associated with renewable energies. For example, Mike Pasqualetti, a geographer, has suggested that developing renewable energy goes along with assuming the consequences of our lifestyles, the impact on the environment of the energies that we are consuming, so the externalities for economics. So we see them where they're close to us, and the conflicts correspond to bringing the consequences of our consumption near to us. Political ideal, Hermann Schier, a former German ministry, also an activist, has argued that decentralized energy, because they are small and decentralized, allow for another political order, another democracy, and another relation to the environment. Alternatives do exist. Territorial or citizen projects or self-consumption projects are developed in certain countries. This is in France, the movement Énergie Partagée, who was developed since the year 2010 and is now networked on a national level and structured into a genuine political movement, which nowadays total up to 250 projects in France. This is not a lot, but this is 150 megawatt installed, mostly PV. While it is not quantitatively significant, it is politically very meaningful because it challenges the dominant way of developing renewable energies and the dominant distribution of value from renewable energy projects and allocation of powers between developer and local territories in France. For the territory, a project with local governance means at least twice as much, if not three, direct local economic impact compared with a private project. Sorry. Renewable energy development has also been criticized as not being a genuine transition. The critic comes mostly in France from the historian Jean-Baptiste Fressoz, who has argued that shifting to renewable energies in the current way is not a transition. It is adding production to production. It is more energy production, more energy consumption. It is an extension of a consumerist and capitalist order that is already there with fossil energies. Fossilization is a notion that has been proposed by sociologist Sujata Raman, which says that renewable energies are assimilated into and undertaken by the institutions and the mode of production of fossil energies, because they are in the end of the same actors. The anthropologist Simon Rowe also pointed to relation to environment and societies that were usual in carbon energy, fossil energy development, such as extractivism or resource grabbing. Sociologists like Komali Yeneti or Rosie Day pointed at the land grabbing logic behind big PV development, for instance, in India, that were taking land from communities that were living off these lands, from nomadic communities. Political scientists in France, like Aurélien Evrard, has shown that wind power in France, first thought as an alternative, was then incorporating in the electricity sector and its usual ways of development. So while all these analyses point to mode of development of these energies that can be inequitable and politically deceiving, the politics thereof is most often not perceptible at first hand. Sociologists like Madeleine Acriche suggested it with the notion of socio-technical system, or Thomas Hughes, an historian, with the notion of seamless web. The idea that once the technology is developed, its politics is scripted in the structuration of the technological network, whose process of emergence is no longer readable. So the web is seamless. You don't see the theme of what was there beforehand. The problem-solving process, which underlays the emergence of the technology and addressed issues of who or what counts, who is entitled, and all the questions I mentioned before, is no longer apparent. The web of things, the actors, non-human, humans that are associated with it, and the politics are incorporated into the technology, so they are seamless. The idea that the politics incorporated into technologies or commodities is erased has also been underlined with other perspective by other social scientists. Anna Tsing, for instance, said that the search for scalability resulted in a logic of avoiding all the singularities in project or technological development and erased singular encounters. So finally ended up erasing all the singularities and the politics that are incorporated in technologies. Although a geographer like Alain Nadaï, a Marxist geographer, pointed at the chains of commodification of goods, showing, for example, for jewelry, the difference between the production of gold in Africa and the way jewelry was marketed, for example, in Italy. And that the whole chain was about to erase the conditions and detach the commodity from its conditions of production. So I will build on these learnings from social sciences about the making of technology to follow the chains of transformation of natural flows into renewable energy and discuss their politics. First, I will take the example of the powering of the wind. A successful renewable energy project incorporates and articulates multiple dimensions together. The siting of wind turbines must be rendered compatible with ongoing uses of land, landscape, air, and with administrative requirements. Developing a project requires engaging sinks such as roof, sites, turbines, but also wildlife and landscape, and requalifying their pre-existing usage or users. However, only focusing on project development is not enough. The full chain starts upstream with the political decision to support the development of wind energy through dedicated policies. As an illustration, we can scheme the chain of actions that results in the current powering of the wind. The chains includes the ways in which the wind is enriched, deposited, harnessed, converted, injected, and commercialized. I'm sorry I won't be very technical on the grid part, by lack of competence, but my concern in following this chain is primarily to shed light on the relations that it sets. So, enriching the wind. Sociologists Boltanski and Desker have talked about the economies of enrichment. They pointed, at least in Europe, at the sort of not end of industrialization, but backing of industrialization, and the fact that the way to produce richness was either to play on memory or to play on future. So they talk about a work of enrichment, which is a political and ontological work, which is to construct differences between things and to set their value on a long future time. So to build differences and temporalities. For energy, it corresponds to the difference between what is renewable energies and other energy. So to set this difference politically, to define it and stabilize it, and then to engage this difference into temporalities of future value and assetization. It makes it possible to associate renewable energy with a stabilized value in the future and to attract investment. Concretely, this was a work of what is called the feed-in tariff, meaning a tariff above price market, stable for 20 years for any kilowatt-hour deemed renewable. Once it's placed in a country, it sets the value of future income per kilowatt for renewable kilowatt-hour for 20 years. It greatly empowers renewable energy developer because then their task is very simplified for attracting investment. They only have to show then they can access the space where the resources is. So wind energy developers only have to demonstrate their ability to access abundant wind or solar resources to access space. Depositing the wind is the next step. It's qualifying a specialty, region, area, or site as one in which wind energy is intense, the speed, and regular, amenable for use, meaning not too turbulent. The developer commonly are setting measuring pools for a few months. They record wind speed, and they have a practical knowledge. They know where connection to the grid is possible. They have a guess about environmental or landscape sensitivity. Institutional mapping of wind potential have started. In France, it was in the year 2000 with the emergence of the feed-in tariff. And they map average speed in meter per second as a guide for developer to locate places where to develop projects. But mapping potential have been extended and technically sophisticated, notably with dynamic approaches to wind variation, accounting for variation in time. So this engages the wind in a type of patterning and averaging turbulence. The thing was very clear, for example, in 2017 in France, when the Energy Agency released a 100% renewable energy scenario. Discussion came about this feasibility of the scenario, and it was argued that with this new method of depositing, of modeling the wind and its turbulences, it could be the siting of the wind farm could be made on a regional level so as to average wind variations and so as to allow for more power to be connected to the grid. So therefore, wind turbulence and therefore intermittency, until recently considered as an essential attribute of the wind, seemed potentially open to redesign. Harnessing the wind is the next operation. It refers to the capture of the kinetic energy of wind as a tumultuous entity in order to convert it and power it. On a physical level, it is carried out by the contact of the wind with the turbine blades, which are designed to be set into motion by the wind. Different from traditional windmills, today this contact is only the visible part of a socio-technical network that has an industrial vocation. Harnessing pursues efficiency and optimization. It translates into a race for more powerful wind turbines and a tight siting to maximize production. Thus, on a technical, financial, and risk level, harnessing seeks scale effect. In detaching the energy from the wind, harnessing renders this energy oblivious to the indeterminacies and singularities of the site in which the turbine is set. What harnessing called as a state scalability. So you have to sort of have a regular pattern, and you have to sort of oblivious to all the singularities of the site, or making sure that things are developed to do so. Harnessing is key in several ways. I'm speaking on a social relations here. First of all, as the physical encounter of the wind with the blades extracts the kinetic force of the wind, it transforms it into a mechanical rotational force. It is an operation that detaches energy from its natural substrate. So the contact with the blade is just detaching the energy and extracting it. That is what Noël Castries, a Marxist geographer, analyzing the dimension of Marxist commodification of nature, calls individuation, meaning that is the representational and physical act of separation from a supporting context, like if I take water from an environment and put it in a bottle. Harnessing is also a work of appropriation. So then most importantly, harnessing is an operation of appropriation of the energy of the wind, which Castries terms privatization, that is an assigning of rights to a named individual, group, or institution. For many reasons that I did not analyze, the legal status of the wind and of the sun as a renewable resource has remained undefined in the European Union. It is res communis in legal terms. The ownership of the energy of the wind or the sun is therefore governed by that of the technical device harnessing it. If I own the turbine, I own the energy that is extracted. Concretely, only the owner of the turbine can claim the benefits from selling this energy, meaning from benefiting of the feed-in tariff, provided of course is granted with all the authorization to build, operate, and connect the turbine to the grid. Fourth, converting the energy of the wind is a work of abstraction. In the case of grid-connected wind turbines, the dominant mode of wind power development today, the conversion of wind energy into electricity takes place in several stages. The blades rotate a gear system that allows an alternator located at the top of the turbine to produce electricity, which is then converted from continuous current to alternative current and upgrade to 20 kilovolt in order to be injected into the grid. So this is purely a technical operation, but this is also a social and political operation, because this change in the physical state of the kilowatts underlies a change in the status and qualification of energy. Once it is injected, the kilowatt leaving the turbine is embedded into the electrical flow. It becomes identical to any other kilowatt. Its geographical origin as a kilowatt produced in a singular wind farm and in a singular sign with singular issues is erased. Renewable quality is thus detached from the physical electric current. It is, in Castrui's term, abstracted, meaning it is assimilated to the qualitative specificity of a thing, of a bigger thing, a larger whole. So renewable origin is thus erased, or would be so, would totally be so, had a guarantee of origin not be put in place. This guarantee allows the producer of a kilowatt to recover its renewable qualification as a computer certificate when injecting it into the grid. So I inject the renewable energy kilowatt and I get a certificate. I'm paid for the regular kilowatt and I get a certificate that I will be able to sell. This certificate can then be rebundled with conventional electricity and marketed as green or renewable electricity. In the end, the energy of the wind has incurred several translations. So, and even I can then rebundle my renewable certificate with nuclear kilowatt and sell it as green electricity, which happens often in France because we have a lot of nuclear, and at certain moments the price of nuclear kilowatt is very low. So in the end, the energy of the wind has incurred several translations, resulting in spatio-temporal separation of production and consumption, as what I was saying for Hartwig about gold and jewelry, with the energy appearing as other than itself, which Castries terms displacement. DC current was a singular product attached with a materially situated process, the production of energy in one site with specific issues. AC alternative current is a generic good that can be brought into equivalence, rebundled, and exchanged. The specific issues that were part of the production of the wind kilowatt in a singular site are no longer associated with the definition of the green electricity that is sold to the final consumer. To be precise, this change is not hidden to the final consumer or from the final consumer. Commercial contracts clearly indicate that consumers only contribute in proportion to their purchases to the overall remuneration of renewable electricity producers. However, the meaning of the guarantee is not transparent, because the extent to which the project remunerated by the renewable energy certificate have actually been assembled in a sustainable way or not can no longer be traced because of the guarantee of origin. So to conclude this first part, in the end, grid-connected electricity is an energy carrier that almost completely separates energy from its supporting environment, because it erases both its geographical origin and its qualitative construction. It is thus necessary to go back to project assembling practices and administrative procedure for project authorization in order to understand the status that is offered to the multiple resources that have been engaged in the production of energy, because this is not only wind. So, to do so, I will quickly consider a kind of critical case studies involving broad issues in the development of wind power in a European migratory corridor in southwest France. This is the case of a wind power project that was being developed in order to repower an existing wind farm located at the border between France and Spain, on the east side of the Pyrenean Mountains. La Narbonnaise, which is this place, is one of the windiest places in France. It welcomed the first industrial wind power project in France in 1990, with an EU TAMI funding, which is European funding, before any feed-in tariffs were in place. In 2010, the project was 20 years old. A repowering project, dismantling the wind farm in order to set up new one and more powerful one, was proposed. It was the first in the country. Neighboring communities shared an interest in the project because they could share its revenues. As a windy place, the small littoral plain of Narbonnaise is also one of two migratory routes for birds on their way from Africa to Eastern Europe and back. Narbonnaise has a strong political history of bird watching. In the 70s, bird watchers met there and set up migration camps, counting bird population passing by in order to attract Europe's and the French state attention to endangered species and the need for regulatory protection. As this wind power site is located within a major migration corridor, this made birds an important project adjuster. Thus, its design and siting proposal involved the collaboration between the wind power developer and the local branch of the French bird protection organization, la Ligue pour Protection des Oiseaux, LPO. As a collaboration between developer and birdwatcher, the project design triggered an experiment. The LPO developed a new method for observing birds, which they called microsighting. Birdwatcher no longer counted birds passing by, but they spotted and followed individual birds, and in their success or failure in passing through these sites or over the existing wind farms. Microsighting multiplied observations and expanded statistical reach. It allowed mapping migratory microcorridors and proposing a sighting judged compatible with bird migration. The collaboration had multiple reach. First, it was about capturing birds' intelligence and endowing birds with new capacities. Second, it opened a potential for sharing the wind and intended to open access to spaces that were deemed protected from wind power development. Third, it did so by reshuffling bird classification according to crossing abilities rather than to statutory protection. In this process, entities were not only requalified, they were also offered an opportunity to perform differently. On the part of wind power developer, this implied a limitation in the size and in the power of the new turbine, their proper siting, and the sharing of benefits. For birdwatcher, they were venturing in evolving the politics of bird protection, which was taking really a political risk, in the same area where migration camps had politicized it in the 70s. And for birds, they were offered an opportunity to become more skilled by the proper siting of the future wind turbine, more skilled to cross the wind farm. I could have developed here an exact opposite case study, dealing with a wind power project located in the Parisian Basin and impacting a local landscape named la plaine, the plain, by the local inhabitants of the nearby village, and who shared this plain for local uses such as walks, hunting, agricultural practices. In this second case study, the process did not offer any status to this vernacular landscape, except that of a non-patrimonial entity, hence not entitled to any kind of official recognition and protection. The whole process and the violent confrontation over the wind power project led to a genuine destructuring of social life in the village, a sort of end of the commons in this village. So retrieving from local association and fighting within family, between neighbors, destructuring of relation between the local mayor and its electors. This is a very violent case study of opposition. Thus, what I would call symmetry is this quality of certain processes, the bird processes and not the Vanville process, the landscape process, certain processes in which entities, human or non-human, are given the possibility to have the consequences of renewable energy development for them to be acknowledged, and their potential to contribute to a different socio-technical network recognized and taken on board. So, to conclude, what I have just done was no more than following seamless webs in their making, which led us to repopulate them with entities, to see the becoming and requalification at work in powering the wind, which is what I call the politics incorporated in the wind power technology. The seamless web, however we call it, we can call it adjustment network assemblage socio-technical system, is both the technology and these entities of the milieu in which it is embedded, and which it requalifies and shapes. Sorry. As Gilbert Simondon, notion of milieu associé, tries to capture. Understanding and qualifying sustainability is thus laying bare the politics that underlies the making of this web, meaning what it does to humans and to non-humans. For all the reasons I mentioned earlier, such as the search for scalability, the sidetracking of singular encounters, the successive translations such as individuation, abstraction, privatization, displacement, the work of the seamless web and its politics are erased after their making. This is precisely what it is said to be seamless. Thus, the seamless web is accessible only on few occasions. The first is when the web is open and in the making. This is when the chaos faces us. We can just stop it by the quiff and take the time to think about how we would like the threats to be organized. The second is when issues are raised because of oppositions and crises, and the technology of the project is challenged. This is what is called generally socio-technical controversies, which brings the chaos back. Issues raise politics, they open threats for us to catch and follow. The third is when we, as social scientists, possibly in collaboration with other scientists and with actors involved in the project or the controversy, decide to retrospectively pull time backwards and follow threads again to understand the politics that has been incorporated in the energy project, which I did on the bird project, on the landscape project. So renewable energy are deemed renewable because they rely on flows of energy and not stocks. But this should not be enough. If we aim for a genuinely sustainable energy transition, energy flows are used by more than us. We may have to learn how to share energy flows with birds, but also with mammals in marine environments and for marine energies and so on. Seamless webs rely on a large array of resources beyond energy flows. So we saw landscape, but this is also the case for social energies. In conflicting renewable energy projects, you see often processes where people put a lot of energy in because they want the project to emerge. And if this fails, this leads to conflicts and to people saying to you, Now you have to wait for a new generation to come to talk about wind power or PV panels. So this is also a potential that you can burn and you can kill for one generation. So we have to also take care about these other resources that are engaged in this project. As the COVID crisis exemplified it, taking transition seriously calls us on stopping separating issues. That is, it calls us on taking and following the multiple threads of renewable energy projects seriously to bring them and their underlying politics into debates. And the problem with social acceptance is that, as it sounds, it pretends to discuss accepting the project without following threads and reopening their politics, which is, as we saw, and not reopening and without following thread and reopening their politics, which, as we saw, is the only way to gauge sustainability. Thank you very much.
There's probably also questions along the chat. I have a question. If I remember correctly, in France, nuclear power paid towards local taxes, property taxes, so that the community benefited from having a nuclear power plant near it. And there was a 1/r² relationship between the payment towards locality and the location of the plant. Is anything like that going on here to supply local support for wind power?
There is, so you have the rent. I mean, you developer approach farmer. So the question is about.
It's not to the farmer, but the general tax base for the development of the community near the facility.
Yeah. I'm coming to. Yes, this is what I was going to do. The question is about the fact that when nuclear plants are developed in France, there is money flowing to the territory and the communities that welcome this nuclear plant. And this was a way to make the community accept, yes, but not the only one. I mean, yes. And is there such things for renewable energy development? So in France, there is a tax going to the region, going to the intercommunalities, which are groups of communities that was from wind power to this. I don't know exactly the percent of it. I think it's about, let me. I have some figures. Is the values of sharing. So it's about 10 to 12,000 euro per year per megawatt that flows down. Okay. And there is also money for the landowners, which rent their land to wind power developer. It's about 2,000 or 3,000 euro per year. If it is a participative financing, I mean, depending, not the one going through crowdlending, which you set aside, it's a different problem, but citizen investment, or now territories or local authorities can develop projects. So it's 2 to 3 times this. I guess it's an incentive for communities to want wind power projects. And in France, the history has been that in 2000, when the feed-in tariff was adopted for renewable energies, there were no, let's say, political agreement between the different parties and parts of the politics to develop wind power. It was still very in the very centralized mode, inherited from nuclear power. And the underlying thought was that giving incentives to developers to go in the countryside by giving them feed-in tariff was enough to develop wind power. And this led to a lot of conflicts. Within 5 years, half of the project almost were opposed. So then there were several attempts and regular attempts at sort of make spatial planification on different geographical levels, first department and then region. And then there is a sort of today of planning or view that X gigawatt should be developed in this region, X in this, but there is no local planning, no local spatial planning. This has been erased because it was too politicized, and it was first developer attacked the planning because they thought it was a barrier to renewable energy development, and then opponent attacked it also. And then at one point, it ended up threatening even the existence of wind farms that had been set up. So a big financial risk for the wind power filière. So there was a political process just to stop it. Voilà. So today, the thing is more, there is on one hand, the citizen movement of renewable energy that tries to tie links between the project and the developer and the territory, so that they call it local governance, that the local actors have a control on the becoming of the project. And the developer can no longer sell the project to another developer after 2 years. So this is very important. And this can go up to taking shares and taking control on all the strategic decisions. This is one way. The other way is that the 2015 Energy Transition Law has empowered territories, local authorities, to develop projects. And so they are doing it. And basically, what they try to do is to launch calls for offers. And this is called, they set conditions for developers about which type of project they want and how they want it. So this is a recent trend. Into
the France all the time kind of leaning on the side of it. That with big on the side. So how would you integrate wind energy? How would you integrate remote variable wind energy?
I don't know the technical. No.
Premise of the question is incorrect.
Sorry.
The premise of the question is incorrect.
Sorry, suddenly I was talking and I don't hear. Let's get the sound.
So, Ramji's question, Alain.
Yes.
And this question was, because nuclear is not how whereas wind is variable. What is the thinking on France about integrating? But Lee's response to that was, in fact, France has pioneered dispatchable in nuclear.
I'm not technically aware of the way to do it, but what I can say, for me, France is also integrated in the European market and to the European grid, which has been since 1999. It's formalized with EU regulation on the unique market. So that's one thing. And when you have too much nuclear, we cannot just export it. The second thing was that effectively it was a huge problem for the grid manager to have energy coming from the bottom, coming up, because the French network was made. You have the transportation network, high voltage, and you have a low voltage distribution network that was conceived and thought to function downwards. So having energy coming upwards was a major issue. This was sort of blocking the development of renewable energy during years. I think it has changed since 5 years. I'm, for example, having a PhD from the Grid Transporter Institution, which is about how to conceive a tariff, electrical tariff, in different scenarios, including scenarios where you have high capacity of renewables with self-consumption or not. So how do you manage to pay for the eventual externalities of having this production and the trouble it makes to the network? So these are questions today, just to say that these are questions today that the grid managers have really taken on board and are looking at. But they have a sort of crisis of existence, really, and this is why they launch this type of PhDs, because they don't know what their role in the future will be if self-consumption really develops, and how like the mission of the tariff and of the grid, what it will be in the future.
So one of the changes that's happening, Alain, is offshore wind, right? And I imagine that the types of conflicts that might emerge there are quite. Just speak to that. Is there any experience in France with regards to, very large offshore projects and what that is looking like?
So offshore projects are developed differently from onshore because these are sort of state projects, state-led projects. So it's national call for offers, where you have consortiums, international consortiums answering to the call. So there has been several generations of calls, different from the UK, in which let's say the ocean is the property of the crown. So the crown has leeway, you say, to develop projects. So the crown was making sort of geological and all the preliminary surveys to sort of secure the space for industrial development. And it was planning it, also the space for development, and then launching the call for industrial to submit project. So on the side of developers, the risk was sort of shared and taken by the crown before developing. In France, the first call for projects was like, do nothing. Like there was no Ministry of the Sea, there was no institution, there was only one office near the Prime Ministry to check that, I don't know, the transportation policies, agricultural policies, so fishing, and were somewhat coherent. But sea had no existence other than this. And in this context, the first call for offshore project was in 2007, 2005. And this office was saying, do not launch any call for project before planning the space, because the industrialists will not be ready to enter a space that is not made for development, because there was no fixed infrastructure in the sea. It was only boats circulating and voilà. So then there was a pressure of industrialists to the Ministry of Industry, and they launched the call. And this project has been a failure. Then they took the lessons, they started to plan the space, to make a spatial planification around the coast. And the way was to decide on a zone, call for project, and then make public debate. So it became very complicated because to debate about a project, the developer has to sort of develop it and have to invest money to sort of specify the project and make it amenable to discussion. But then if there is opposition and you have not chosen the right zone, then the developer has just sunk cost. Voilà. So this was the problem of the second generation. So then there were discussions on, it depended also on the zone, and because for some zones, the state was just blind and deaf and just didn't listen. For example, I attended to a public debate where there was one attempt, it failed, and the state, 10 years after, came back to the same zone to propose the development of a project, and the fishermen that said, don't go there, this is a fishing area. So big conflict on this. The last versions of the call are a bit different. There has been discussion between industrialists and the state, where industrialists say you should sort of make a definition of the project for the call that is less precise, because what happened before is that one problem was that there were offshore projects and no relation with the territories. So strong opposition because they didn't see why first the state was going here in front of me. And then there was absolutely no economic returns for the local territory on the littoral. So the state attempted one call where they really worked so to be aligned with European rules on open competition, but to write the things so that they would obtain exactly what they wanted. And they imposed certain relation, like developing industries for turbines in the harbor, conditions for the project. So this was the second. And in this second type of call, the problem was that when it entered into public debate, for example, in Saint-Nazaire, in the west of France, there was an opposition to the project because there were wetlands close to it, and which are protected environmental areas. So Green NGO challenged the project on this point, and during the debate, it appeared with a survey that they were right, that there was a risk. And after the debate, they saw that legally, they could not change anything to the project because it was so well written by the state that it was made to obtain exactly what they wanted ex ante. So then this became a big problem because the institution of public debate, which is an independent institution, said we are losing our ethic in this offshore debate. So we will stop opening public debates on offshore if the way of developing the projects remains the same. So then there is a recent generation of calls, which is different, where they say, for example, they say we are opening in Normandy, the full Normandy facade, we are opening a public debate about how do we want a gigawatt of offshore and where do we want it. And we will identify big zones and the state will make surveys to see if the geology fits the purpose and voilà. So more of a type of UK approach and more of an upstream debate about the purported zone to develop. So we are in this approach, and they call it envelope permits, meaning the definition of the project at the stage of selection is no longer so accurate. So to leave a possibility to adapt the project when it's over. And the implication for
electricity supply, electrification of transportation and electrification for electricity supply.
I'm not sure I can talk about this topic. It shows that, I mean, hydrogen is one of the big things that the state wants to develop. So then it came to how do you produce electricity to have the hydrogen? And so what you just probably heard is, I mean, also with the Ukraine war and the threat on gas, but it was decided before. Macron has, it was decided under François Hollande government that we would reduce nuclear energy to 50% of electricity. It currently is around 70. So we would shut down certain infrastructure. Macron has just est revenu dessus. Has just cancelled this, voilà, revised it, and wants to develop several EPR production unit. So this is in line with his idea of hydrogen and electric vehicle. Voilà. They have also decided, it's pretty recent, to really upscale the ambition on offshore wind power to 500 gigawatts. So to basically, the logic that is currently underway is to reduce onshore wind power, which has been very politicized during the political campaign, with candidates just coming to an onshore wind farm and saying, even Marine Le Pen said, I will dismantle the existing wind farm, which was just meaningless. Voilà. So it was a major issue. So the idea is to lower down the development of onshore wind turbine, to make a lot of offshore, and to make nuclear energy. And it goes along with the electrification of transport.
Any other final questions? About Marine Le Pen, what would have happened if she had been? Do you think she would have?
There was.
Can you repeat the question now?
Yes. The question is, what would have happened with Marine Le Pen if she would have been elected? I suppose the question is about onshore wind power. Yeah. You cannot know because of what she says, what she can do. But I mean, the President Macron challenged her during the debate, saying something that even he doesn't answer clearly on his side. He said to her, but you know that even if you develop nuclear, you won't have nuclear production until 2030 or after. I mean, it's not for now. So what do you do until 2030 if you start dismantling turbines? And then she said, oh, but I can wait to do it. And she also said, he said, you will spend the money of French people dismantling what we have done. It's not very good use of public money. And she said, but you know that the developers have put aside the money for dismantling. So it's not spending the money for, voilà, it's not very consistent policy, but I don't know. I think it was very political during the campaign, and it was like purchasing power almost. That thinking and saying something about onshore wind power was saying something, being close to people. It has this sort of a resonance, understanding their concern. But there is just one thing to say, because we recently did a survey on participative financing. Because there are different types. One is crowdlending. The other is what I said, like territories that are now have the legal framework to develop projects if they can do it. They know how to do it, or to ally with developers, professional developers to do it. And you have this citizen movement, which has constituted funds that can make money flow. So they they raise money on a national level, and local projects come to them to say, I want to develop a project. They can use the fund to raise locally money, and the funds put the national money on top for them to have 51% of the shares. So this is very a political model, and a model that is financing the projects in part. The model of crowdlending is quite different. The sector of the wind power developer has been really financialized during the past year. So, and you have part of them that really develop project, in developing in the sense I make all the survey and I get the authorization. This is what is called development. Then you have construction. So you have developer, they develop project in order to sell it, which we call bascule. I don't know in English, which is they get they make a financial value, and they make this value because the project is endowed with 20 years of feed-in tariff. So even part of these developers, they do not set real business, but they subcontract the different parts of the development to bureau d'études, consultant, so that they can develop project, have a portfolio, and sell themselves and get out of the sector. So then the problem is with this, and this is what we pointed in the study, that they are just extracting the value of public support to make financial value. And since they don't stay in the sector, the value of renewable energies public support is going away. It's just extraction. So, and this model is also putting a big threat on wind power development, because the relation to the territory is just cynical. Meaning they come, they can make participative financing to tamp down people, but the participative financing is only marginal. It brings value to people on their livret d'épargne, 5%, but it's like 1% of the value of the project. It does not finance, it is not financing renewable energy development. It is tamping down local opposition, but it is developing a cynical relation to territories that is just putting on wind power a threat in the future, because you don't do it once, but not twice with the territory. If a territory sees a developer coming and making a public meeting, opening participative lending and giving money, and then selling the project and say bye-bye. So this is something that is very detrimental to the sector.
Really quick question. You said at the beginning that you're collaborating with German and with the Commission,
yeah,
or colleagues. Do they have similar stories in their development projects, or are their experience different?
So Germany was very specific because it was the place, as I said, northern Friesland, which is a region really close to Denmark. Yeah. It's a region of
hardly anybody there.
Yes, yeah. Very desertic and very lowland, yeah, where they have a tradition on landscape to build dikes collectively. So in landscape studies, this region has been really identified as northern tradition of landscape culture, meaning that its landscape is managed collectively through assemblies, and managing landscape is managing the territory. So this is in this setting that grassroots communities started to develop in the garden wind turbines. And then it was helped by the German government, and it gave rise to industrialization. So in this region, from the 2018, pretty recently, 2018, you had the region was covered with turbines. The model I had a PhD student working there to look at the way. These were villages of burger wind power, meaning villages wind power. So it was collective investment, very careful with rules. Anyone could come, no one could take a big share. There was a recognition of the risk taker, so a difference. At any point, if you wanted to step out, you could step out. When there was repairing, the thing was reopened, taking account of the first risk taker and rewarding them. So to make people step on. So in this region, the Poles were giving 80% of support to wind power. It was covered with turbine. It was only burger wind power. And what happened, I didn't analyze in detail the story, but had the story told to me in an interview by an office, German office, which is located in the French Energy Climate Ministry for cooperation on renewable energy. And what they told to me is that, I think it was in 2018, a ministry of energy, a former green, thought that renewable energy was now good, was competitive, and that should not be protected anymore as to the price of energy. It could compete and kick the utilities, and this would be the best victory for renewable energy. So there was this sort of political will to really prove the force, the economic force of renewable energies. So what they did, they stopped to protect it, but to community wind power, they gave an advantage in the procedures of instruction, making it short track. But the definition of community was not very precise. So what happened is that all utilities made cooperatives of salaries, and they applied. And there was so much megawatts in the pipe of non-local developers that for the first time, and 3 years after, people saw all this park coming, being developed, constructed, with no relation to the territory. And they started to talk about acceptability, which was a word they didn't know. So talk about acceptability, put in place rules that we had in France like 20 years ago, which was 500 meters from the habitation at least, discussing where 500 meters or 1 kilometer, all these considerations which never had been considered before. Voilà. So Germany is very different. And now what they were saying to us is we are fall in the same pot as you for wind power. Tunisia, we didn't work on wind power. It was on thermal solar. But for example, another example was in Portugal. It was very, very interesting. In the north of Portugal, you have communities, and you have a type of common land, which is called baldius, and which is really structuring agriculture and all the territory there. And when there was, after the dictatorship, when Portugal entered Europe, there was sort of a conflict in this area because environmental policies went down from Europe in a sort of paternalistic state, which sort of tried to put this area under protection. And there were conflicts between these communities that thought they had the right to decide for the land, because this was common land, common organization, and the state that was putting them under environmental protection, so freezing the activity. And when wind power came there, it sort of re-empowered the communities because the discussion they had the right to develop wind power. They were entitled to discuss it. And so the whole tension between the state and the communities was rediscussed. And when the state respected the political pipes of these communities, the things went well and wind power was developed. But when, voilà. It depends a lot, en fait, on the Our conclusion with this comparison was that in countries like Portugal or Germany, where you have strong collective organization on the land, if wind power is allowed to build on these existing collectives, it works. But in France, there's no such collectives. Or when you bypass this collective, like in certain cases in Portugal, then you get conflicts.
It was fun.